There is a force moving within you, an invisible tide shaping every breath you take, every movement of your limbs, every beat of your heart. You do not command it, at least not in the way you command your hands to grasp or your legs to walk, and yet it listens. It always listens. William Walker Atkinson, in the first pages of The Mind and the Body, the Science of Psychosomatic Influence, speaks of this force not as an abstract philosophy, but as an undeniable reality. He pulls back the veil on something you have always known, but never truly named. The mind is not merely a passenger in the body's journey. It is the driver, and if it is the driver, one must ask, where has it been taking you all this time? For most, the answer is unsettling. We like to think of illness, of strength, of weariness, of vitality as things that happen to us, as though the body were an island, adrift on the sea of chance. But Atkinson urges us to look deeper, to see what has always been plain before us. Consider the man who carries the weight of worry on his shoulders. Observe the tightness of his jaw, the stiffness in his spine, the way his very presence seems to shrink as though his body were curling in upon itself, bracing against some invisible storm. His mind has written a script, and his body has followed it. Or take the woman who wears bitterness like an iron chain. See how her features harden over time, how her voice sharpens, how the lines on her face seem carved not by age alone, but by the thoughts she has nursed day after day, year after year. And then there are those who move through life with an undeniable glow, those whose presence alone seems to bring warmth into a room. These are not merely people of good fortune. They are people whose minds have shaped them into something resilient, something alive. It is an uncomfortable truth, for it means that we are not merely victims of fate. If our thoughts hold such power, then we are, whether we acknowledge it or not, the architects of our own condition. Atkinson does not deliver this revelation as a gentle suggestion. He presents it as something undeniable. The connection between mind and body is not a theory, it is a law, as unyielding as gravity itself, and if we ignore it, we do so at our own peril. Have you ever noticed how the body betrays the emotions the mind refuses to acknowledge? How a man who believes himself young stands with ease, moves with grace, while another of the same years stumbles beneath the weight of imagined frailty? This is not mere coincidence. The nervous system, the lifeblood of sensation and movement, is but an instrument of the mind. It carries orders, whether they are given consciously or not, and the orders it receives shape everything from the pulse in your veins to the tension in your skin. Atkinson speaks of the way worry gnaws at the stomach, how fear quickens the pulse, how anger poisons the blood with its fire. But these are not momentary effects. No, they are habits of the body, forged over time. A single moment of fear may pass, but a lifetime of worry will mold a man's health in ways he cannot see until it's too late. A single outburst of rage may subside, but a heart that has beat with resentment for years will one day find itself weakened, exhausted by battles it fought within. Yet, if the mind can destroy, it can also rebuild. This is where Atkinson offers more than just a diagnosis of the human condition. He offers a door, a possibility, a quiet, insistent promise. If the body bends under the weight of negative thought, what happens when thought is turned toward strength, toward healing, toward mastery? There are those who walk through the fire and do not burn. Those who endure what should have broken them will stand unmoved. Their secret is not one of luck or mere toughness. It is the force of will. Atkinson does not treat willpower as a simple matter of stubbornness. He speaks of it as the unrecognized key to human vitality. It is the conductor of the mind, the force that takes the endless flow of thoughts and directs them like an artist shaping clay. Without will, thoughts run rampant, shaping the body in ways we never intended. But with will, true sharpened will, one can seize the reins. One can direct thought as an artisan wields his chisel, carving away what is weak, shaping what is strong. But will is not something most have trained. It's not a gift given at birth, but a weapon forged in the fire of self-awareness, and those who have mastered it do not simply resist pain or push past exhaustion. They dictate the very nature of their physical existence. If the body obeys the mind, if the mind in turn is shaped by the will, then the only question left to ask is, who is in control? Have you been shaping yourself with intention, or have you been shaped by habits you never questioned but thoughts you never tamed? There are forces at work within you that you do not see. You wake each morning, stretch your limbs, breathe deep, and feel the pulse of life moving through you. You assume it is the work of nature, of biology, of something cold and mechanical. But beneath it all, something else is shaping your body, dictating how strong you feel, how much energy fills your veins, how illness finds its way into your flesh, or avoids you altogether. William Walker Atkinson, having revealed the undeniable bond between the mind and body, now takes us deeper into the heart of that connection. It is not enough to acknowledge that the mind influences the body. The question that follows is inevitable. How? How does a fleeting thought bend muscle and bone? How does an unseen idea hold sway over something as tangible as health? The answer is simple, yet staggering. The mind does not merely affect the body, it feeds it. It is not an external force pressing upon flesh and blood. It is woven into every fibre, moving through every nerve, whispering instructions to every organ, every cell, every unseen function keeping you alive. And whether those instructions bring vitality or decay is determined not by fate, but by the unseen forces of thought, emotion, and will. The body does not work alone. It does not struggle through the hours of the day without guidance. There is something that directs it, something that sends messages through the bloodstream, altering chemical balances, shifting the rhythm of the heart, changing the way the body heals or weakens. Atkinson speaks of this with a certainty that leaves no room for doubt. The mind, through its silent messages, controls the body's every process. He points to the most undeniable evidence: emotion. Consider what happens when a man is gripped by sudden terror. His body instantly reacts. His pulse leaps, his breathing becomes rapid, his muscles tighten, preparing for a fight that has not yet come. His body does not wait for him to make a decision. It moves as though commanded by something unseen. Or take sorrow, the kind that lingers in the heart, refusing to leave. A man weighed down by grief finds his body slowing, his appetite fading, his vitality draining away, as if life itself has grown too heavy to carry. And then there is joy, pure, uninhibited joy. Have you not seen how it lights up the face, how it straightens the back, how it fills a person with an energy that seems almost boundless? These are not coincidences. They are the visible signs of an invisible truth. What the mind believes, the body obeys. But Atkinson does not stop there. He takes us beyond mere emotions into something far more subtle, far more dangerous, and far more powerful: the role of belief. A man convinced of his own strength walks with confidence. His body moves with ease. His muscles remain firm. His health endures, not because he has been given some special advantage, but because his mind has never entertained the thought of frailty. And yet another man, born of the same flesh and blood, carries in his heart the quiet conviction that he is weak, that he is prone to illness, that age will take its toll sooner rather than later. And so his body listens. He begins to feel more fatigued, his steps slow, sickness finds him more easily, and he calls it fate. But it is not fate. It is a story written by his own mind, carried out by his body as if it were a duty. Atkinson does not ask you to believe this blindly. He points to history, to the many who have withered away not because of disease, but because of their own expectations. He speaks of those who, told they were dying, deteriorated rapidly, only for it to be discovered later that they were never sick at all. He speaks of those who, given a false diagnosis of impending death, faded away as though life had been stripped from them by nothing more than words. The body, you see, is not the master. It is the servant, and it serves the mind whether the orders it receives are given in wisdom or ignorance. Atkinson does not leave this revelation hanging in the air. He explains how it happens, how an idea, nothing more than a whisper in the mind, can translate into something so real that it shapes the flesh. The answer lies in habit. A single thought entertained for a moment may pass like a shadow, leaving no trace. But thoughts that return, thoughts that stay, thoughts that are nurtured daily, these become something more. They become beliefs, and beliefs become commands. The nervous system carries those commands like an unseen messenger. It alters the way the body functions, changes the chemistry of the blood, instructs the organs, strengthens or weakens the immune system. If you believe yourself strong, your body fortifies itself. If you believe yourself fragile, your body bends to that expectation. And this simple truth is what separates those who live in radiant health from those who succumb to unseen forces they never even knew they had control over. Atkinson does not present this knowledge as something to be feared. He does not suggest that every fleeting worry will ruin a man's health, nor that every moment of joy will grant eternal youth. Instead, he offers something more powerful: awareness. He asks the reader to pause, to reflect, to consider the thoughts that have lived within their minds for years without question. What silent beliefs have been shaping you all this time? Have you unknowingly sent signals of weakness to your body? Have you given yourself over to worries that have carved their mark into your health? And if so, what happens when you take back control? Atkinson does not answer this for you. Not yet. Because before one can change, before one can rewrite the script the body has been following for so long, one must first understand something deeper. It is not only thought that feeds the body, it is emotion, energy, and intent. And if the body is constantly responding, constantly obeying, then what happens when one consciously directs it? You are not simply a passenger in your body's journey. You are its master. Whether you have wielded that power knowingly or not, every ache, every surge of energy, every beat of your heart is a response to something deeper than mere biological function. There is a command being issued, an unseen script being followed. The question is, who is writing it? William Walker Atkinson has already stripped away the illusion that the body acts alone. He has shown us how thought feeds flesh, how belief sculpts strength or weakness, how the mind whispers instructions to every fibre of our being, but knowledge alone is not mastery. To truly take control, one must understand something even more fundamental. The mind does not speak in words alone. It speaks in feeling, in focus, in the energy we allow to take root within us, and the body, ever the servant, listens. But if that is true, if the mind's influence extends beyond fleeting thoughts and into the very core of how we function, then the next question follows naturally. What happens when the mind is trained? For that is the difference between those who merely exist and those who thrive, between those who let life happen to them and those who command it with precision. There are men who seem to carry exhaustion with them, as though it were a birthright. They wake tired, they move sluggishly, they seem trapped in a body that fails them, though no doctor can find a single thing wrong. And then, there are those whose strength defies logic, men who outwork the younger and hardier, those whose energy remains high long past the years when others begin to fade. Atkinson tells us this is no accident. The difference is not merely in diet, nor exercise, nor genetic fortune. It is in the state of mind that governs the body. A scattered mind produces a scattered body. A man whose thoughts are unfocused, whose emotions are unchecked, whose beliefs about his own energy waver from day to day, he will find himself easily fatigued, his body unable to draw upon reserves it does not believe it has. But a man who has trained his mind, who has mastered his thoughts, who does not allow emotion to run him ragged, his body follows suit. He remains strong, resilient, untouchable by the slow decay that claims the undisciplined. For just as the body takes its orders from the mind takes its orders from focus and will. And this, Atkinson tells us, is where true mastery begins. Focus is more than mere concentration. It is the force that shapes reality. A man's body bends not just to his passing thoughts, but to the dominant focus of his mind. Have you ever noticed how a man obsessed with sickness inevitably finds it? How the one who constantly checks his pulse, who watches every slight discomfort with fear, who convinces himself that something must be wrong, always seems to be in a state of illness, even when no disease is present. His body, following the mind's lead, begins to behave as if it is ill, weakening under the weight of unrelenting focus. And then, there are those who refuse to entertain such thoughts, those who, when met with pain, do not dwell on it, do not feed it with attention, but instead focus their minds elsewhere. These people seem to recover faster, to remain untouched by the afflictions that cling to others. They are not reckless, they are simply not enslaved by every passing sensation. Atkinson calls this the law of intention. That which the mind focuses upon, the body will reinforce. Energy is not a fixed resource. It is not something one simply possesses in limited supply. Atkinson argues that energy is something called upon, something activated or depleted by the mind's state. A man who constantly focuses on his fatigue will feel it deepen. He will slump, sigh, and carry himself as though life has drained him. He may believe that his exhaustion is purely physical, but in truth, it is the mind reinforcing the state it expects. Meanwhile, another man, given the same body, the same hours in a day, will push forward with strength. Not because he is superhuman, but because he refuses to let fatigue consume his mind. He has trained his focus. He does not dwell on his limits. He calls upon energy rather than surrendering to its absence. Atkinson challenges the reader. How much of your exhaustion, your sluggishness, your lack of vitality is a product of mental habit rather than physical reality? The man who focuses on weakness invites weakness. The man who focuses on strength calls it forth. But here lies the real secret, the real revelation that so few ever come to realize. Most people believe they are reacting to their body's signals, adjusting their lives accordingly. They feel tired, so they rest. They feel sick, so they retreat. They assume that they are the passengers in this process. But Atkinson tells us something different, something that changes everything. The body is not leading, it is following. Every man who has ever trained his body, who has forced himself through exhaustion, who has willed himself to recover from illness, who has demanded strength from his muscles when they would rather give out, these men have proven this truth. The body does not dictate your limits, the mind does. And the moment you stop passively reacting, the moment you stop seeing yourself as a prisoner to fatigue and health fluctuations and instead command your body as a true master commands a servant, everything changes. This is where the shift happens. This is where you stop waiting for energy and start calling it forth. This is where you stop allowing thoughts of weakness to make you weak. A man wakes up and assumes the day will feel like all others. He believes himself to be the same person he was yesterday, carrying the same strengths, the same weaknesses, the same limits. And so, without realizing it, he follows the same script. He moves as though bound by invisible chains, unaware that the greatest force restraining him is not his body, but in his mind. William Walker Atkinson has taken us through the foundation of the mind's rule over the body. We have seen that thought does not merely influence health, it dictates it. We have seen how belief is not passive, but actively builds the conditions of the body, crafting vitality or decay with each silent conviction. We have seen that energy is not merely possessed or lost, but summoned or surrendered. But now we arrive at the next realization, one that is both liberating and terrifying. If the body is a servant to the mind, then what happens when one refuses to believe in limits? What happens when one stops assuming that exhaustion must come, that aging must weaken, that pain must always be obeyed? Atkinson challenges us to consider something most never dare to, that many of the limitations we believe to be absolute are, in fact, self-imposed illusions. Look at the world around you, and you will see a great contradiction. There are men in their 20s who move as though life has already drained them. They sigh as they rise from their chairs, they speak of tiredness as if it were an identity. They accept without question the idea that life only moves in decline. And yet, there are men twice their age, thrice their age, who walk with vigour, who do not permit their bodies to betray them, who seem to live outside the very laws others take for granted. What separates them? Atkinson tells us plainly, it is not chance nor genetics, nor mere circumstance. It is expectation. The young man who expects to be tired will find himself tired. The old man who refuses to expect weakness will not be weak. The difference is not in the body, but in the unseen instructions the mind has been feeding it for years. Every day you are telling your body something. When you rise in the morning and think, I don't have the energy today, your body listens. When you assume that age must bring decline, your body prepares for it. When you accept, without challenge, that some things are inevitable, that your strength must lessen, that your resilience must fade, your body obeys. But the great secret Atkinson now reveals is that these instructions are not based on truth. They are based on habit. Most men have never questioned them. They assume that because they have always felt a certain way, they must always feel that way. They assume that because others decline, they must decline. They accept limits without ever daring to push against them, without ever asking, is this real, or have I simply never tested the boundaries? Consider the times when men have gone beyond what should have been possible. The injured soldier who, despite wounds that should have left him motionless, continues to fight. The man lost in the wilderness who survives longer than any doctor would have predicted, clinging to life with sheer force of will. The mother who, in a moment of desperation, lifts something she should not have been able to lift. Were these miracles? Or were they proof? Proof that the body contains more strength than it is ever allowed to use. Atkinson tells us that the body is not operating at full capacity, not because it cannot, but because it has been trained to believe that it must not. The truth is unsettling. It means that for years, perhaps for a lifetime, we have been living beneath our potential, never truly knowing how far we could go because we have never dared to test it. Atkinson does not present this as mere philosophy. He offers a challenge. The challenge is to stop accepting exhaustion without question, to stop assuming that strength has limits that cannot be pushed, to recognize that the mind, through nothing more than its expectations, has been holding the body in a state of unnecessary restriction. And once this truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. The next time fatigue comes, one must ask, is this true exhaustion, or have I simply been trained to surrender at this point? The next time the body resists, one must question, is this an actual limit, or is it the edge of a boundary I have never dared to push? And the next time weakness is felt, one must decide, will I accept it, or will I challenge it? Atkinson does not ask the reader to blindly accept that all limits are false. He asks something more radical, to test them. To, for once, refuse to give in at the first sign of tiredness, to, for once, push a little further when the body says it has had enough. To, for once, take a feeling of weakness and simply ignore it, if only to see what happens. For the truth is this, when a man begins to test his limits, he often finds that they were never truly there. The body, long trained to obey weakness, will eventually listen to new commands. It will adapt. It will strengthen. It will learn, just as it once learned, fragility, that endurance is possible. Atkinson does not leave us with mere theory. He leaves us with a shift in perception. The body is not a cage, it is a tool, and like any tool, It can be sharpened, honed, and strengthened, but only if the wielder understands that it has been dulled, not by time, but by belief. So what happens when a man stops assuming he must grow weaker? What happens when he begins to act as though strength is his birthright? What happens when he refuses to obey the voice that tells him to stop, to slow down, to accept decline? That is where the next chapter leads. For if these invisible chains can be broken, then what else might be possible? A man does not know how strong he is until the moment comes when weakness is no longer an option. He can live for years under the illusion that his limits are fixed, that his body's capabilities are predetermined by forces outside of his control. But there always comes a moment, a crisis, a test, a demand from life itself that forces him to push beyond what he once believed possible. What happens in that moment is revealing. Some men falter, crumbling under the weight of long-held assumptions. They believe in their fragility, and so their bodies obey that belief. But others, those who have awakened to a deeper truth, find something stirring within them, a force that was always there, buried beneath years of conditioned limitation. William Walker Atkinson now brings us face to face with that force. He has shown us that the mind shapes the body, that belief dictates health, that what we accept as exhaustion or illness is often nothing more than the result of unconscious training. But now, he takes us to the next step, the realization that within every person lies a dormant power, a strength that has been suppressed, not by the body's weakness, but by the mind's acceptance of weakness. The question is, how do you awaken it? Energy is not something that exists in fixed supply. It's not something that drains away like water in a leaking bucket, never to be replenished. It is something that can be summoned, something that, when properly directed, rises to meet the needs of the moment. Atkinson speaks of this force as something that has always existed within you, waiting. It is the energy that allows a man to push forward when he should have collapsed, to continue when his body has given every signal of quitting. But most men never touch this reservoir because they never challenge the first sensations of fatigue. They assume tiredness means depletion, that discomfort means stopping, that pain means surrender. But what if those signals were not final? What if they were merely the mind's first test, waiting to see whether the body's master, the mind itself, would accept the suggestion of weakness or demand more? Atkinson speaks of the undeniable gap between men who crumble under the weight of difficulty and those who push forward, seemingly untouched by exhaustion or hardship. The difference is not merely physical, it is psychological. The man who accepts his fatigue as an absolute truth will feel it deepen. He will slump, slow, and resign himself to weakness. His body, always obedient to the commands of thought, will make his assumption real. But the man who questions his exhaustion, who refuses to let his mind dictate that he has reached his end, will discover something incredible. There is always more. There is always another reserve of energy, another layer of strength waiting beneath the surface, but it's only revealed to the man who demands it. Atkinson speaks of those who, when tested, have found strength they did not know they possessed. The runner who, believing himself spent, discovers he can sprint when the finish line is in sight. The warrior who, though wounded, fights as though untouched when survival demands it. The laborer who, exhausted at the end of the day, finds himself capable of working through the night when necessity calls. What changed? Did their bodies suddenly manufacture new energy in an instant? No. What changed was the command issued by the mind. The belief in limitation was shattered, and suddenly strength that had always been there was made available. Atkinson does not present this realization as a mystical phenomenon. He presents it as a science, a reality that, when understood, can be used consciously rather than discovered only in moments of desperation. He tells us that strength, endurance, and resilience are not things given only to the lucky few. They are accessible to anyone willing to challenge the false signals of limitation. But how does one do this? First, one must become aware of the moment the mind suggests stopping. Fatigue does not arrive in an instant. It comes as a whisper first, a gentle suggestion from the body that says, it would be easier to rest now. The undisciplined mind listens to this voice, accepts it without question, and begins the process of surrendering energy. But those who command their strength refuse to listen. They push just a little further. They demand a little more, and in doing so, they unlock a new threshold, a second mind that others never experience because they never defy the first call of exhaustion. Atkinson insists that this is not about recklessness, nor about pushing to the point of harm. It is about knowing that the body has been conditioned to quit before it is truly done. And when one learns to reject that conditioning, what follows is a transformation in energy, resilience, and vitality. Most people believe energy is a purely physical thing, derived from food, from sleep, from rest. But Atkinson suggests that the greatest source of energy is not external, it is mental. We have all experienced moments where fatigue vanished in an instant. Think of a time when you were exhausted, drained from work, ready to collapse into sleep, but then suddenly, news arrived that filled you with excitement. A long-lost friend appeared. A long-awaited message came. An opportunity you did not expect revealed itself. And what happened? The exhaustion disappeared. Instantly. Not because your body changed, not because you suddenly ate food or gained hours of rest, but because your mind was jolted into a new state. And in that moment, energy flooded back into you. Atkinson tells us that this is no accident. This is proof that energy is directed by mental state far more than by physical condition. And when one learns to shift their mental state at will, they gain access to energy that others believe is impossible. Atkinson does not leave us with mere inspiration, he leaves us with a call to action. The realization that more strength, more energy, more resilience is available to us is not enough. It must be trained, it must be tested, it must become a conscious practice, not an accidental discovery. There is a difference between those who merely inhabit their bodies and those who command them. Most people live as though their flesh were an independent thing, responding to hunger, fatigue, and pain without question, acting as though the body were an untamed beast, obeying only its own instincts. They wake when they feel rested, sleep when they feel tired, eat when hunger calls, and slow down when exhaustion whispers. They do not realize that in doing so, they have relinquished control. William Walker Atkinson has shown us the hidden reserves of strength buried beneath years of unconscious limitation. He has revealed that fatigue, weakness, and even illness are not always inevitable truths, but rather habits formed through unchallenged belief. But now, he takes us even deeper, into the science of direct control. For if it is true that the body obeys the mind, then it is also true that one can learn to command the body at will. This is not theory. This is not a mere motivational idea to be pondered and forgotten. It is a discipline, a skill as real as any craft, an art as intricate as any mastery, and those who learn it do not simply live differently, they live with power. Most people are ruled by sensation. If they feel tired, they assume it is time to stop. If they feel discomfort, they assume it must be obeyed. If a surge of anxiety strikes, they assume it is something external, something beyond their control. But Atkinson tells us something radical. Consider this. If a man were truly at the mercy of his body, if his energy were truly dictated only by rest, then no one would ever summon sudden bursts of strength in an emergency. No one would ever find themselves alert and wide awake the moment danger appears. No one would ever experience those strange moments where exhaustion vanishes at the arrival of excitement or good news. But these things happen. and they happen because energy, focus, and even bodily sensation are dictated not by the body alone, but by the mind's command. And if that is true, then what happens when a man learns to wield that command at will? Atkinson speaks of the training of sensation, how the body can be conditioned to respond not according to instinct, but according to will. Pain is an example. Most people assume pain is absolute, an unchangeable force that must be endured. But we know that focus can lessen pain, that distraction can make it vanish entirely, that in moments of deep determination, pain can become nothing more than a distant echo. So what is pain then? A reality or a response dictated by attention and expectation? The same is true of fatigue. A man who believes himself exhausted will feel exhaustion deepen. A man who refuses to accept it will find that the body still has more to give. This is no accident. This is the law of mental precedence. The body does not operate independently. It follows orders, and the orders it follows are dictated by where the mind places its focus. Atkinson takes this idea further. If sensation, energy, and even pain are subject to mental command, then so too is the body's internal state. There are men who have learned to slow their heartbeat at will, to lower their blood pressure through nothing but thought. There are those who have trained themselves to breathe so deeply, so completely, that they have reshaped their entire health, transforming weak bodies into strong ones simply by mastering the act of breath itself. And this is not something reserved for the few. Atkinson makes it clear, physiological control is not a gift, it is a skill that begins with awareness, learning to notice, with absolute precision, the signals the body sends, and in turn learning to respond not with reaction, but with command. At the heart of all this is one undeniable truth. The body follows the will. Where will is weak, the body is weak. Where will is untrained, the body remains undisciplined. Where will is sharpened, the body responds as though made of iron. Atkinson describes men who have hardened their bodies against the elements, men who can walk through freezing winds without shivering, men who can endure burning heat without faltering, not because they are built differently, but because they have learned that sensation, like thought, can be mastered. And this mastery is not found in mere resistance, but in acceptance without reaction. A man who fears cold will feel cold more intensely. A man who braces against heat will suffer more than the man who remains indifferent to it. Sensation once again follows attention and expectation. So what happens when a man stops reacting? What happens when, instead of yielding to tiredness, he simply ignores it? What happens when, instead of fighting discomfort, he lets it exist without resistance, without acknowledgement, until it fades into nothing? Atkinson tells us that this is the next step toward mastery. The body's signals do not need to be fought, they need to be overruled. But Atkinson does not leave the reader with mere knowledge. He offers a test. He does not ask for blind belief, he asks for an experiment. The next time tiredness arrives, the reader is to pause, to not react, to not obey it immediately, to instead shift focus, to direct attention to something else, to push forward for just a moment longer, and then to notice what happens. For most, something strange occurs. The tiredness, so powerful just moments before, lessens. It does not vanish entirely, but it no longer commands, and in that moment the reader begins to see fatigue was not absolute. It was a suggestion, one that for the first time was ignored. And if that suggestion can be ignored, what else can be? Atkinson does not provide the answer. Not yet. A man walks through life convinced that his body is something separate from himself, something beyond his control. He believes that his energy, his vitality, his strength, these things were handed to him at birth, and they will inevitably decline as the years pass. He does not question it, he does not challenge it, he accepts the decline as part of nature. unaware that it is not nature that is working against him, but his own belief. William Walker Atkinson has already taken us through the first steps of mastery, the realization that fatigue, pain, and even the limits of endurance are not dictated solely by the body but by the mind's silent commands. He has shown us that when one stops blindly reacting to the body's signals, the truth is revealed. The body does not order, it obeys. And now he leads us further into the heart of mastery itself. If the body is a servant to the mind, then it does not merely follow, it learns. And if it learns, then it can be trained. It can be rewritten. Look at two men of the same age, the same physical build, standing side by side. One remains sharp, strong, energized well into his later years, while the other complains of exhaustion, of stiffness, of aches that seem to come from nowhere. They were given the same raw material, so what changed? Atkinson does not hesitate in his answer. The difference is not found in genetics, nor in diet alone, nor in the circumstances of their lives. The difference is in their expectation. The man who does not question his body's strength, who moves each day with the quiet conviction that he is vital and capable, he does not weaken as others do. He does not assume exhaustion, and so exhaustion does not take hold. His body responds to his belief, reinforcing his strength, sustaining his endurance, adapting to his quiet command. But the other man, the one who expects decline, finds that decline arrives swiftly. He anticipates weariness, and so he feels weary. He assumes that his body must grow sluggish with time, and so it does. His muscles, once obedient and strong, now work against him, for he has unknowingly given them permission to do so. The body does not argue with the mind. It does not resist instruction. It follows, unquestioning. But the great mistake is that most men do not realize they are giving instructions at all. Every sigh of frustration, every complaint about being tired, every grumble about aches and pains, these are not harmless words. They are commands, spoken into existence, reinforced each day until they solidify into reality. A man who constantly tells himself he is weak-will, in time finding his body listening. A man who always speaks of his fading strength will, inevitably, lose it, and yet the opposite is just as true. There are those who never accept the idea of decline, who walk through life as though strength is their birthright, who do not even entertain the thought that their bodies should betray them, and so they do not experience the betrayals that others do. Their bodies, shaped by expectation, continue to serve them, growing stronger instead of weaker, because they have been given no permission to do otherwise. Atkinson tells us this is not wishful thinking. This is not optimism alone. This is a truth that has existed for as long as man has walked the earth. The body, always listening, always learning, does not set its own path. It follows the one you have set for it. A man who wishes to change his body does not do so through force alone. He does not merely push against fatigue, nor does he blindly attempt to outwork exhaustion. No, he must first change his relationship with it. When tiredness comes, most take it as a final order. Stop, rest, give in. But those who understand the nature of command do not take tiredness as an absolute. They acknowledge it, but they do not obey it. They move forward, if only a little further, and in doing so, they send a signal, not to the conscious mind, but to the body itself. That signal says, this is not where we stop. And something incredible begins to happen. The body, once accustomed to stopping at the first sign of strain, begins to adjust. It learns that energy is not so easily depleted. It understands that endurance is not fixed. It rewires itself, just as it once wired itself to believe in weakness. Over time, this shift becomes permanent. The body, once ruled by hesitation, now moves with certainty. Fatigue is no longer a signal to stop, it is merely an obstacle to push through. Strength is no longer something to maintain, it is something to expand. Atkinson tells us that this is where transformation begins, not in muscle, not in diet, not in mechanics, but in the reprogramming of expectation. A man who expects to weaken will weaken. A man who expects to endure will endure, and a man who expects to thrive will thrive. This knowledge is not meant to be stored away and forgotten. It is not something to be pondered, admired, and then left behind. It is something to be tested, to be proven, not through belief alone, but through action. The next time exhaustion comes, a man must pause and ask, is this real, or have I trained myself to feel it at this moment? The next time pain arises, he must question, is this something I must submit to, or is it merely a signal I have been conditioned to obey? And when strength is needed, he must demand, what happens if I push past what I have always assumed to be my limit? For the body will listen. It has always been listening. The only difference is that now the commands will be given with intention. Atkinson does not end this lesson with the conclusion. He does not close the book on this idea as though it is finished. No, he leaves the door open, for there is something even greater that follows. A man believes that energy is something outside of his control. He thinks it arrives in the morning and fades by nightfall, a resource that must be carefully rationed, a flame that burns out no matter how much he wishes to hold on to it. He assumes fatigue is natural, that exhaustion is the unavoidable cost of effort, that his body dictates when he must slow down, stop, and recover. But William Walker Atkinson has already led us beyond that illusion. He has shown us that the body does not act on its own. It listens, it obeys, it follows silent commands issued by the mind. He has taught us that strength is not something given but something shaped, that endurance is not something predetermined but something trained, that pain, exhaustion, even weakness itself are, in many cases, suggestions rather than laws. And now, he leads us to the next revelation. If the body is not bound by the limits we once believed, if it can be commanded, reprogrammed, reshaped, then what happens when we move beyond resistance? What happens when we no longer think of energy as something that must be preserved, but as something that can be created? For years, a man is told that energy is something he must protect, something that can be drained away, something he must carefully manage so that it does not run out. He is taught that fatigue is a sign of depletion, that when the body signals tiredness, it means resources have been spent. He assumes, without question, that he must always operate within these boundaries. But look at the world around you, and you will see something that shatters this illusion. A man who loves his work can labor from morning until night without feeling drained, while another man, disinterested and detached, is exhausted within the first hour. A child at play can run for hours, tireless, while an adult watching from the sidelines complains of fatigue simply from standing. A soldier in the thick of battle can march for miles, endure hunger and hardship, yet feel no exhaustion, because his mind is too focused on survival to allow weakness. And then, there is the man who should have collapsed but didn't. The man who, at the very brink of his strength, found something deeper, something more, an energy that should not have been there but was. This is not chance. This is not biology alone. This is proof. Proof that energy is not fixed. Proof that depletion is not always real. Proof that energy is something that can be generated at will, if one knows how. Atkinson tells us that the body does not grow tired simply because it has reached its limits. More often, it grows tired because the mind has accepted tiredness as truth. A man who believes he is spent will feel spent. His muscles will tighten, His breathing will slow. His body will begin shutting down, not because it must, but because it has been told to. But a man who does not allow himself to entertain the idea of depletion will find, to his own astonishment, that the body still has more to give. Fatigue is not always the result of depletion. It is often the result of expectation, and expectation can be rewritten. Atkinson presents a radical idea. Energy is not something you lose, it is something you summon. This is why excitement can erase tiredness in an instant. This is why adrenaline can make a man forget about pain. Why urgency can override hunger. Why determination alone can keep a body moving long after it should have given out. The key is not in the body, but in the mind's relationship to energy itself. A man who treats energy as something finite will always feel as though he is running out. But a man who sees energy as something created, not rationed, will find himself drawing from an endless supply. Energy does not come solely from food, from rest, from sleep. These things support it, but they do not dictate it. Energy is something deeper, something more fundamental, something that exists within the very essence of life itself. Atkinson speaks of the mind's ability to generate energy through focus, through intention, through an unshakable belief that exhaustion is not real. He challenges the reader to set this, to, in a moment of tiredness, refuse to acknowledge it, to stand straighter, to breathe deeper, to decide rather than react, and in that moment, something shifts. The body, which had begun shutting down under the weight of expectation, suddenly sparks back to life. Energy, which had seemed depleted, returns. Not because the body was restored, but because it was released from an invisible chain. Atkinson calls this the activation of internal reserves. A man who refuses to accept exhaustion as his default state will find that energy begins responding to his demand. The body learns, just as it once learned weakness, that its resources are greater than it had been led to believe. And when this realization takes hold, not as a momentary insight, but as a deep and permanent truth, he will move through life with energy that others cannot understand. There are those who go through life constantly managing their energy, treating it as a fragile thing, always on the verge of running out. They rest not because they must, but because they believe they must. They slow down not because they have truly reached their limit, but because they have been trained to believe limits arrive at predictable times. And then there are those who seem unstoppable. The men who work tirelessly not because they ignore rest, but because they have tapped into something deeper. The athletes who push beyond exhaustion, discovering a second wind that should not exist, but does. The creators, the builders, the visionaries who move with an energy that seems impossible yet is undeniably real. They are not different in body, they are different in mind. Atkinson tells us that the secret to endless energy is not found in external sources. It is not in stimulants, nor in perfect diets, nor in carefully managed schedules. It is found in command. The mind, when trained properly, becomes the master of energy itself. And so the man who once believed himself drained will now begin to question it. The moment tiredness arrives, he will pause, he will straighten, and he will ask, is this real, or have I merely accepted it as real? And more often than not, he will find that the moment he refuses to submit, energy returns. It has always been there. It was simply waiting for permission. Atkinson does not stop at endurance alone. A man can summon energy at will. He can break through exhaustion, deny weakness, and draw from reserves of strength that others never realize they possess. But what happens next? For many, simply having energy is enough. To wake up feeling strong, to move through life without fatigue weighing them down, to never again feel like a prisoner to tiredness or sluggishness. But William Walker Atkinson tells us that there is something beyond this. Energy once summoned is not meant to be wasted. It is not enough to simply possess strength. It must be directed. A river that overflows its banks does not gain power. It becomes destructive, chaotic, and unfocused. But a river channeled into a clear path with intention and force behind it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a current strong enough to shape landscapes, to generate power, to move mountains. Energy, when controlled, is no different. Atkinson now leads us into the art of harnessing energy, not merely resisting exhaustion, not merely summoning strength, but channeling it with such precision that every movement, every action, every thought carries with it the force of a man fully in control of himself. There are men who wake up feeling tired before they have even begun their day, not because they lack rest, but because their energy is being leaked without their awareness. They are exhausted, not by physical effort, but by the weight of undirected thought, scattered attention, useless tension. Atkinson tells us that energy is not lost only through movement. It is lost through mental friction, the constant unnecessary drain caused by emotions that are not controlled, by distractions that are entertained, by a mind that is left untamed. A man who lets his energy spill in 100 different directions, worrying about things that do not matter, reacting to every minor irritation, allowing himself to be pulled in endless, meaningless directions, will always feel depleted. He will mistake this depletion for true tiredness when in reality it is nothing more than mismanagement. The men who move through life with effortless power, the men who seem to possess boundless endurance, the men whose very presence commands attention, these are not men who have more energy than others. They are simply men who do not waste it. Every movement they make, every thought they think, every action they take is aligned, focused, and deliberate. There is no leakage, no unnecessary expenditure. Their energy is their own, and they use it with precision. Imagine a man walking through a storm. The wind howls around him, trying to knock him off balance. The average man leans against the wind, wasting his energy, trying to fight it, growing exhausted with every step. But the wise man does not fight. He moves with the wind, redirects its force, shifts his weight so that instead of resisting, he is carried forward. Atkinson tells us that most people live their lives fighting the wind, wasting their energy on resistance, reacting emotionally to things they should ignore, tensing their bodies unnecessarily, allowing their thoughts to spiral into exhaustion. But the man who understands control learns to let go of wasteful reactions. He stops clenching against life, stops bleeding energy on things that do not serve him. He moves efficiently, deliberately, effortlessly, and in doing so he finds that energy, once squandered, is now his to command. Every great force in the world is powerful, not because it is merely large, but because it is concentrated. The sun's heat is warm on the skin, but when focused through a magnifying glass, it can start a fire. A single drop of water is nothing, but a waterfall, concentrated and unyielding, can carve through rock. The same is true for human energy. A man who disperses his energy in 1,000 different directions will always feel weak, no matter how much strength he possesses. But a man who learns to concentrate his energy into his actions, into his presence, into his work, will always become unstoppable. Atkinson tells us that focus is not just about attention, it is about where energy flows. A man who focuses intensely on a task finds that he is not drained by it, he is electrified by it. When energy is given a clear path, it does not disappear, it builds upon itself. This is why those who work with passion do not feel depleted, why those who move with certainty never seem to tire, why those who are fully engaged in their purpose do not complain of exhaustion. They are not working harder, they are simply using their energy correctly. Atkinson offers a challenge. A man must begin noticing how he spends his energy. Does he give his full attention to the task before him, or does his mind wander, leaking energy into useless distractions? Does he allow himself to be emotionally disturbed by things that do not deserve his energy, or does he remain steady, choosing when and where to invest his force? Does he tense his body unnecessarily, wasting strength on stress and strain that serves no purpose? Or does he move smoothly, powerfully, without wasted effort? These are not small matters. These are the difference between a life of exhaustion and a life of power. The man who masters his energy masters himself. And once a man masters himself, he is capable of more than he ever imagined. Atkinson has led us through the realization that energy is not finite, but created. He has shown us that exhaustion is often self-imposed, that strength is something trained, that limits are nothing more than habits that can be broken. But now he takes us beyond even this. For once energy is controlled, once it is no longer wasted, once a man has full command over his force, another question arises. What happens when that energy is not just contained, but expanded? What happens when a man not only stops losing strength, but begins generating more than he has ever known? What happens when a man moves beyond endurance, beyond focus, into the art of limitless vitality? A man assumes that his energy, like the fuel in a lamp, burns down until nothing remains. He believes that as the hours pass, as effort is expended, his reserves dwindle until he is left with nothing but exhaustion. He calls this natural. He calls it inevitable. He does not question it. But William Walker Atkinson has already led us beyond this illusion. He has shown us that energy is not simply used, it is directed. That those who feel depleted are not necessarily tired, but scattered, unfocused, wasting their energy in 1,000 unconscious ways. That those who seem to possess boundless endurance are not stronger in body, but sharper in mind, channeling their energy with purpose, rather than bleeding it through distractions and tension. But now, we step into the next realization. If energy can be summoned, if it can be preserved, if it can be focused, what happens when one transcends even these ideas? What happens when energy is no longer something a man must struggle to maintain, but something that is constantly renewing itself? What happens when a man stops thinking of energy as something external to be gathered, and begins to understand it as something that flows from within, endlessly without depletion? This is not fantasy, this is not mysticism. This is the next step in mastery. A man who sees energy as something finite will always fear its loss. He will rest anxiously, worried that he will not have enough strength for what is to come. He will move cautiously, believing that effort must be rationed, that once spent, his energy is gone forever. But the wise man sees differently. He understands that energy is not a resource, it is a process. It does not simply sit within him, waiting to be used. It is generated, moment by moment, through the way he breathes, moves, thinks, and directs his focus. The body is not a machine that depletes over time. It is a living system that adapts, that strengthens, that expands when given the right conditions. And when one understands those conditions, energy becomes something endless. Atkinson speaks of the principle of expansion, the idea that energy does not run out with use, but instead increases in response to demand. Consider the man who exercises daily. At first his body tires quickly, his muscles burn, his breath is heavy. He assumes he has reached his limit. But when he pushes beyond that limit, something unexpected happens. The next time he trains, he finds himself stronger, his muscles endure longer, his breath is steadier. His body has not lost energy, it has learned to produce more. This is the first truth of limitless vitality. The more energy one uses, the more the body learns to create. But there is a key difference between those who expand their energy reserves and those who simply exhaust themselves. The undisciplined man wastes his energy, burning it chaotically, expending effort without focus, draining himself through stress, through unnecessary movement, through idle mental strain. He pushes his body, but without awareness, and so his energy never grows, it simply disappears. The disciplined man, however, understands how to challenge himself without depletion. He exerts himself, but with control, with breath, with precision. He does not burn his energy, he trains it, multiplies it. He follows a law that Atkinson reveals as fundamental. Energy expands when it is used correctly. A man who learns to push his body while remaining relaxed, a man who moves with power but without tension, a man who exerts himself without struggle, this is the man whose energy does not fade but grows. There are those who seem to radiate vitality, who possess an energy that is not just physical but magnetic, undeniable, powerful. It is not just that they are healthy, it is not just that they are strong, it is that their mind itself is generating energy. Atkinson tells us that thought is not neutral, it is either draining or energizing. A man who fills his mind with worry, doubt, hesitation, he is leaking energy, constantly, without realizing it. His body may be at rest, but his nervous system is engaged in an invisible battle, burning through reserves even as he sits still. But the man who thinks with clarity, who moves with purpose, who holds a mind that is steady and unwavering, this man's energy is not lost through thought, it is created by it. When the mind is sharp, the body follows. When the mind is calm but intense, relaxed but focused, energy does not fade, it increases. And so, Atkinson presents the true foundation of limitless vitality. Energy is not merely in the body, it is in the state of mind that directs the body. When the mind is scattered, exhausted, anxious, so too is the body. But when the mind is clear, unwavering, certain, the body follows suit, drawing from an endless reservoir of strength. A man who desires boundless energy must first understand that his body and mind are already capable of it. He is not trying to gain something external, he is simply removing the habits that have been blocking his natural power. Atkinson challenges the reader to begin noticing where energy is lost in daily life. Do they move with tension, wasting strength on unnecessary resistance? Do they breathe shallowly, starving their body of the oxygen that fuels energy production? Do they waste thoughts on anxiety, scattering their focus, unknowingly draining their reserves? These habits do not simply weaken a man in the moment. They train his body to be weak, to expect depletion, to remain small when it could be expansive. But when one begins to breathe deeply, to move efficiently, to think with clarity, to stop wasting energy on useless tension, then the body adapts in a new way. It stops shutting down. It stops running low. It begins to generate energy as fast as it is used, until exhaustion itself becomes something foreign, something unnatural, something irrelevant. This is the state of mastery, the state of limitless vitality. Atkinson has now led us to the point where energy is no longer something to be feared, no longer something to be managed. It is something that is created, sustained, and expanded upon demand. But now, another question arises. If energy is not just a physical force, if it flows from the mind, the will, the intention, then what happens when one learns not just to expand energy, but to harness it as an unstoppable driving force in life? What happens when a man learns not only to feel boundless energy, but to direct it toward a vision, a mission, a purpose so powerful that his very presence becomes undeniable? A man can possess endless energy, but if that energy has no direction, it is nothing more than a fire with no purpose, a wind that scatters instead of propels. He may feel strong, capable, alive, But if he does not harness that energy and turn it towards something greater, he remains stagnant, running in circles rather than moving forward. William Walker Atkinson has led us through the process of breaking free from false fatigue, of training the body to generate boundless energy, of reshaping the mind's relationship with strength, endurance, and vitality. We have seen that the body is not a fixed machine, but a system that adapts to the mind's commands. We have learned that exhaustion is not something we must accept, but something we can overcome, not by force alone, but by understanding the flow of energy itself. But now, we arrive at the greatest truth. For what is energy if not the raw material of action? What is power if it is not used to build, to create, to move? A man may be full of energy, but unless he channels it into purpose, he will remain restless, directionless, always moving but never progressing. Atkinson now teaches us the art of direction, how to take this immense force that has been cultivated and turn it into unstoppable momentum, into mastery over life itself. There are men who are full of life, who seem to burn with intensity, yet they accomplish nothing. They are always in motion, always seeking, always working, but their work leads nowhere. Their efforts are scattered. Their energy, though abundant, is like a river with no banks, wild, unfocused, wasted. Atkinson tells us that raw energy is not enough. A man who merely possesses energy but lacks focus will always feel agitated, impatient, unsettled. He will leap from one task to another, unable to sit still, unable to move with steady, deliberate power. His mind will race, his hands will be restless, his body will feel the weight of endless motion but without forward movement. And so, despite his vitality, he will accomplish little. But there is another kind of man, a man whose energy is not chaotic, but honed like a blade. A man who does not simply work hard, but who directs his work. A man who does not merely possess strength, but who applies it with precision, turning every movement, every thought, every moment into an act of purpose. This is the man who rules his own life. And this is what Atkinson teaches us to become. The greatest forces in nature are powerful because they are concentrated. The sun's warmth is pleasant, but when focused through a magnifying glass it becomes fire. Water can be calm and still, but when channeled into a strong current it can generate power, carve mountains, move civilizations. Energy is no different. A man who scatters his energy in all directions will always feel exhausted, not because he lacks power, but because he is spreading himself too thin. He is trying to do too many things at once, reacting to everything, allowing his strength to be pulled in every direction except the one that matters. Atkinson tells us that true mastery comes not from simply having more energy, but from learning to direct energy into a singular, unwavering focus. It is not about moving faster, working harder, or burning with endless intensity. It is about alignment, ensuring that every movement, every thought, every action flows toward a single goal. There are those who seem to possess an undeniable presence, the kind of men whose movements are deliberate, whose words are precise, whose actions feel like they carry the weight of certainty. They do not waste time. They do not hesitate. They do not scatter their strength in 100 directions. Instead, they move with the quiet confidence of a force that knows exactly where it is going. And because their energy is aligned, they achieve in months what others fail to accomplish in years. This is not luck. This is not chance. This is the result of a trained mind, a trained body, a trained focus. Atkinson tells us that the moment a man learns to direct his energy fully into his chosen path, he accelerates beyond those who are merely trying to work harder. He stops feeling the pull of distractions. He stops losing himself in meaningless tasks. He stops wasting his own power, and in doing so, he begins to move at a speed others cannot comprehend. Atkinson does not leave this as mere theory. he offers a path forward. The first step is eliminating wasted motion. Most men feel exhausted because they are constantly pulled in too many directions, always shifting focus, always worrying about things that do not matter, always responding to the world instead of driving their own actions forward. But the moment a man becomes conscious of where his energy is leaking, he begins to reclaim his strength. He stops investing time in things that do not serve him. He stops chasing distractions disguised as opportunities. He stops allowing his energy to be dictated by outside forces, and, in that moment, something shifts. His body no longer fights against itself. His mind no longer feels the friction of hesitation. Every ounce of his energy is now moving in a single direction. And once energy is fully harnessed, once it is no longer wasted, no longer dispersed, but fully concentrated, something incredible happens. A force is created. A momentum so strong that once it begins, it becomes nearly impossible to stop. This is the moment a man goes beyond effort and steps into mastery. Atkinson tells us that most men live their entire lives trying harder, pushing more, exhausting themselves in a constant struggle to get ahead. The greatest men, the ones who move with force, with certainty, with an undeniable presence, these men are not struggling. They are simply aligned. Their energy is not in conflict. Their actions do not work against them. Their mind, body, and purpose are moving as one singular force, and because of that, they become unstoppable. This is where true power begins. Not in mere energy, not in mere focus, but in the absolute control of one's direction. The ability to move through life with such intensity, such unwavering force that nothing stands in the way for long. Atkinson has now taken us to the edge of understanding, where energy is not just something to maintain, not just something to grow, but something to wield like a weapon, like an unstoppable current, like a force of nature. For once a man has mastered his own energy, learned to summon it and control it, he can channel it into unstoppable action.